When it comes to finding somewhere to sleep for the night, you essentially have three options. You can wild camp, you can stay at an official campsite, or you can have a bit more luxury with a B&B or a hotel. I won't go into too much detail when it comes to B&Bs or hotels. I'm sure most of you know how to use the internet to find one. But in the UK, to find a hotel and B&B, you will need to get yourself to a more built up area in most cases. Small towns and cities are your best bet, and some of the small villages have some rooms available at pubs. The price of a room for the night can vary a lot in the UK from location to the time of the year. If you find a room for £70 to £80 a night nowadays, you are doing alright. Most rooms are going to be around the £100 mark though, but depending on location, can be much more. In my experience from both working in hotels and using them from time to time on my bikepacking adventures, most of the places have somewhere to leave a bike. Sometimes they have a garage, sometimes they might leave it in an office, and occasionally they might only have an outdoor space around the back, normally by the kitchen. So it's best to call the place and make sure they have somewhere safe to leave your bike and somewhere that you are personally happy to leave your bike. If you would prefer to camp, then you can find official campsites dotted around the place. Some are seasonal and some are open all year round. Some have showers and other facilities, and some are just a field. Normally you do need to pre-book your camp spot, but sometimes you can just turn up and get a spot for the night. Prices again vary just like hotels and can be anything from around £10 a night to £50 a night. The final option is to have complete flexibility and wild camp. Here we need to go over a few things because in England and Wales, wild camping is not officially permitted without the landowner's permission. Apart from Dartmoor, where at least the time of making this video is still permitted in sections that you are allowed to wild camp. In Scotland, you have the right to enjoy most land as long as you act responsibly. You can wild camp. You can set up a camp spot and stay for 2 to 3 days before moving on. However, in England and Wales, things get a little complicated, and I'm sure you have heard many people say that wild camping in England and Wales is illegal. Well, the good news is that is not completely true. It is not illegal. You are not going to get a criminal record or going to prison for wild camping. However, as essentially all land is owned by someone in England or Wales, technically if you decide to wild camp, you would be trespassing, as you have not been granted permission from the landowner. Unlike some countries, this is not a criminal offence but a civil matter. What does this mean in reality? It means that if you are somehow discovered wild camping by the owner of said land, then you can be asked to leave, and not leaving will then become aggravated trespass, which can become a criminal offence. So the rule is to always be polite, apologise and move on if discovered. Also, if you are spotted setting up the camp, my recommendation is to move on then also. However, I really want to make this clear, as this is a question I get asked time and time again, and I understand why. But if you are wild camping correctly, meaning setting up late and leaving early and not having great big fires, then the likelihood of you ever being discovered is next to none. The best way to go about wild camping in England and Wales is to set up just off the main trail, whether that be a bridleway or a footpath. Once you get off road and the sun has started to set, you will very likely see no one. You will start to get a feel for a place once stopped, as to how busy a trail might be. When looking for somewhere to wild camp in England and Wales, it's important to choose a spot that isn't going to get in the way of someone else using the trail. Even though you are very unlikely to see anyone after sunset, you don't want to be camping directly on the trail because people can still come through at night. Most likely someone just like you enjoying the outdoors. Just because wild camping is not permitted does not make it illegal. And while Scotland 100% have it right, you can wild camp in England and Wales. There are plenty of remote areas where you cannot see anyone all day and especially at night. But you must follow the rules of setting up late and leaving early and just have no fires. Use a little stove if you want, but leave no trace. Completely understand the anxiety of camping somewhere and maybe bumping into somebody, but the realistic chance of somebody actually seeing you once the sun has set is practically zero. With that being said, wild camping in the UK is best with a tent or a bivvy. You can use a hammock in the UK, but it can be a lot harder to find places as a lot of the woodlands in the UK are private and often the trails don't really go through them, so it's a lot easier with a small tent or bivvy. When choosing a tent for a bikepacking trip in the UK, you have a couple of options. A freestanding tent. A tent that uses poles to form the structure of the tent and can be used without staking it out. These tents are likely to be a little heavier than non-freestanding tents, but offer the flexibility of setting up the areas that it can be hard to stake a tent out in. Non-freestanding tent requires staking out to keep their shape. To set up non-freestanding tents, first staked out, then typically popped up with trekking poles or an alternative pole. When it comes to deciding between freestanding and non-freestanding, they both have their advantages and disadvantages. A non-freestanding tent often is lighter and makes carrying it easier. Normally using one or two small poles can mean a freestanding tent is easy to carry as the poles are often the bulky part of a tent. However, you need to look at where you will be using the tent. The terrain across the UK is ever changing, and a tent that requires staking down can cause issues at times if the ground is rocky. Personally, I prefer the flexibility of a freestanding tent as it often means you can just set up the inner on a nice day and it's not such an issue on rocky ground. It will all come down to personal preference at the end of the day though. A single wall tent has one layer of fabric that serves as both the structure and the weather barrier. It's lightweight and quick to set up, making it great for fast and light bikepacking or mountaineering. However, its lack of ventilation can lead to condensation build-up inside. A double wall tent, on the other hand, features two layers, a breathable inner tent and the waterproof outer rainfly. This setup allows better airflow and reduces condensation, offering more comfort and protection in the wider ranges of weather conditions, though it is bulkier and takes longer to pitch. So while choosing the right tent is going to be personal preference, there are a few factors that you should consider and look for when choosing your tent. With the UK being a wet place, whether that be from the rain or condensation, and the weather temperature can change quite a bit from nightfall to morning, a few things to look for are: can you set up the tent while raining and keep the inside of the tent dry? Some tents, mainly double wall tents, set up inner first, and while that is okay most of the time, it makes setting up the tent in the rain less than ideal. Keeping the inner part of a tent dry is essential for staying warm and comfortable. So ideally opt for a tent that sets up outer first. At some point going to have wet clothes at the end of the day bikepacking in the UK, and you don't want to keep your wet gear inside with you when you sleep, so make sure the tent has suitable space to store your wet gear. Also consider how your tent will be stored. A double walled tent can be separated from the outer, meaning if the outer is wet in the morning, you can pack them separately. It's not always possible to completely dry a tent in the morning. Look for a tent with a side opening door to make it easier to get in and out of.